Hi. Thanks for checking out the first edition of our new monthly show called Space Alert. The Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space was created in 1992 to protect the heavens from a new arms race and to protect it from the expansion of nuclear power in space as well. Each month, we're going to have different guests, different global network leaders. We start with the convener of our board, Dave Webb from the UK, and board member Tamara Lorincz from Canada. And we also want to thank board member Will Griffin, who's doing all the tech work, making this show possible. So thanks to you all, and welcome to Dave and Tamara Lorincz. All right, why don't we start out by having you both just briefly introduce yourself. Dave, you want to go first?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm, as you said, Dave Webb. I'm the convener of the Global Network. I used to be an engineering professor at university. I'm retired now. I started off with engineering and then changed to peace studies partway through because it seemed to me that was a bit more useful to the planet than some aspects of engineering anyway. So I'm also currently the chairperson of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament in the UK as well.
Good morning.
I forgot to mention, because I think it's quite useful to know that I'm also the webmaster for the Global Network's internet page, which is www.space4peace.org. Sorry, Tamara. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Good morning. Thank you so much, Bruce, for having me on your very first Space Alert show. So my name is Tamara Lorincz. I'm a longtime peace activist, environmentalist, and feminist. I've been involved with the Global Network for about 16 years. I'm also a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Canada section. I'm currently a PhD student at the Balsillie School of International Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier University, and I'm focusing my research on the climate and environmental impacts of the military, but I also would like to just quickly acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Waterloo, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the neutral peoples along the Grand River. And it's our Indigenous peoples, both in Canada and the United States, that have been on the front lines defending our land, air, and water.
Great, thank you very much for that. I should also say that you had a wonderful debate editorial, I guess we'd say, in the Toronto Star in the last couple of days. It was fabulous. It was about a debate about whether NATO should continue or be canceled. And so I refer people to it. I put it on my blog, which is called Organizing Notes. And so it's really a good read. You did an excellent job. So let's get into talking about NATO and its role on the militarization of space. Could you each briefly talk about how your country is involved in NATO and particularly in NATO space? Tamara, you want to go first?
Sure. So Canada is a founding member of NATO, which began in 1949. Canada, along with 11 other Western European countries, helped found the military alliance. Of course, it's dominated by the United States, which has the largest military budget. And it's always been a U.S. general that has commanded the military arm of the alliance. Canada's membership in NATO very much informs our defense policies. So our current government is a Liberal government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and it introduced a new defense policy in 2017 called Strong, Secure, and Engaged. And it says very explicitly in that policy that that it has been developed based on our membership in NATO. Canada has been engaged in every single NATO operation and war exercise, and it's because of our membership in NATO that Canada has been increasing military spending over the past decade. And it's also because of our membership in NATO that Canada will not join the new treaty on the abolition of nuclear weapons, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So in terms of space, Canada has been involved in space for the past 60 years. We were the third country to launch a satellite in space, and Canada is working very closely with the United States and with NATO on developing new space capabilities.
All right, Dave, go ahead. Same question.
Yeah, well, the UK too is a founder member of NATO, and this history is very much similar to Canada, it would appear. We've been involved in just about every military exercise that NATO has had. We've also hosted NATO summits here in the UK, and we're continuing to increase our military spending in the same way as Canada. In fact, we've gone beyond now what NATO has been suggesting in the past as the requirement or the need to kind of increase the spending. So just recently, our government here has increased that military spending and also decided to increase the number of nuclear weapons or nuclear warheads anyway that the UK has for no apparent reason. We don't quite understand why they've done this. But also, of course, because the UK nuclear weapons are part of the NATO, they're handed over to NATO more or less, part of the NATO artillery, if you like, then we are not able to have a no first use policy of nuclear weapons. Many people in the UK believe that we have got such a policy, that we wouldn't be the first to use nuclear weapons, but we can't have that because as members of NATO doesn't have a no first use policy. So it does dictate what we can do with our defense policy and our security policies. And just recently, the UK has been signing up to more collaboration with different countries for space, in terms of space. And one of the things there is to get more deeply involved with the things that are going on with the US and with NATO, which I guess we can talk about some of those things later on.
Tamara, talk to us about NATO's plan for space, a thing called NATO 2030. What is that?
Yes, so last year, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg brought together an expert panel to develop a new reflection process, to develop a new strategy for NATO. And NATO 2030 has come about. It's called United for a New Era. It's really a justification for NATO's continued existence, but it's a very dangerous, ambitious plan to expand NATO geographically and politically. NATO 2030 is a document that was released this past November, and it's available publicly. And if you were to look at the document, it lists all of the threats and challenges that NATO faces. So the top two threats to NATO that it identifies are China and Russia. And then one of the other challenges that it mentions is outer space. So very much influenced by former President Trump bringing about a new space force. NATO is starting to develop a very aggressive posture in space. So it has declared in this document that space is a new battleground, and that it's an important new domain for war, along with land, air, sea, and cyber. And so people are very concerned about NATO's intentions in space. NATO along with its NATO 2030 document, has also developed a NATO space policy that came out about a year and a half ago. But that document, the NATO space policy that was developed by the defense ministers, is not available publicly. And so there's concern about what NATO's real intentions are for space. But we know by looking at the NATO 2030 document that is publicly available that it has a very aggressive posture. It wants to ensure that NATO members maintain superiority and access to space. It sees space as a contested, crowded, and competitive domain that it wants to be able to control.
All right, thanks. I'd just like to add, when Trump pushed through the Space Force through Congress, it had to go through the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives in Washington. So the Democrats had the ability to stop Space Force, and the only thing they asked for in those negotiations before the final vote was that it be called the Space Corps rather than Space Force. That was all the Democrats wanted. So this really illustrated, I think, to most of us that it's a bipartisan program to move the arms race into space. Dave, in UK, I know there's been an effort lately to expand spaceports, space launch facilities. And this is happening all over the world. We're hearing from all different parts of the world that there's real pressure to increase, to build more spaceports. First of all, why is that happening? And then why is it happening in the UK as well?
Yeah, I think, our government has said that they're interested in making the UK a meaningful player in space. And I think this is because it's one of the fastest growing sectors in the commercial and military, of course, arenas. So in the UK now, there's quite a lot of interest in building small mini satellites. And I think that's happening worldwide because of the advances in technology and the fact that small satellites are very cheap to launch and easy to produce or easy to manipulate, etc. Then these are becoming the norm, mini satellites. So these are also then easier to launch, and they can be launched from two different types of launch site. Vertical, the normal thing that we think of as launching satellites, rockets, which launch vertically from the ground, or horizontal launch sites, which are aircraft taking off with the satellites. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So the horizontal launch sites, which are places where aircraft take off, carrying satellites, which are then put into orbit from the aircraft at a high altitude. Now, the forecasts are with the industry that it will be worth over $1 trillion by around 2040, this increase in space activity. And the UK has said it wants to capture 10% of that market by 2030. So it seems that the government views space as a potential path to some kind of economic recovery after the havoc that's been caused by the COVID-19 experience. And so the government wants to develop a commercial launch capability from the UK. And that's I think, probably happening in other countries too. In terms of what's happening in the UK specifically, I mean, the government's already paying Lockheed Martin several £1 million to look at the possible spaceport locations in the UK. And a number of them have been in Scotland. Scotland has, is a quite high latitude on the Earth, and this is very useful for launching particular satellites into a low Earth orbit, polar orbit, which will enable Earth-wide coverage over a period of about an hour and a half. And that means they're very useful for surveillance, for photo reconnaissance, and for communication satellites, all which have, of course, a military application. And as Lockheed Martin is involved, then it's not surprising that the military is one of the high kind of aspects on the list of requirements. Lockheed, in fact, has chosen a small island in the Shetlands off the north east of the country of Scotland, of the Scottish mainland, to be one of its Shetland Space Centre for its vertical rocket launch operations. And at the moment, this is kind of in some kind of difficulty because there's a number of challenges to the spaceports that have been suggested. Another one in Scotland, two in the Outer Hebrides, another set of islands just off the Scottish coast on the other side of Scotland, really, and also two others at Prestwick and Argyll for these horizontal launches. And in Britain, in the rest of Britain, there are also proposals for one in Cornwall and possibly one in Wales too. And these are all being kind of coming together in some kind of alliance of the spaceport suggested places. They're all being pushed to as being very, bringing in more jobs, bringing in more money, etc., etc. So there's a big push here in the UK for development of these things.
All right, thanks. Here's a question for both of you. It's why do you think our Western governments, particularly the NATO members and partners, and the media, the corporate media in our particular countries, are so active with this demonization of Russia and China and Iran, nonstop? Tamara, you go first. What do you think is happening with that?
I think our countries, the NATO military alliance, is demonizing Russia, China, and Iran to continue to treat them as enemies. To enrich the military-industrial complex, to continue to justify NATO's existence. My country, Canada, has hundreds, over 500 soldiers right now in Latvia, right on Russia's borders. We're leading a NATO battle group in Latvia. We have been training soldiers in the Ukraine. We've had fighter jets, our Canadian CF-18 fighter jets in Romania, flying up and down Russia's border. We have Canadian warships that have been in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea. All of this is very much to provoke Russia. We have also had Canadian warships in close to the Korean Peninsula, the South China Sea, again to provoke China. And this is used in the corporate media. They talk about China and Russia being threats, to keep Canadians very concerned, to keep Canada spending more on the military, buying new weapon systems, to deter these quote unquote what they call adversaries. And so this is, perpetuating the military-industrial complex. It's creating a new Cold War, a new arms race, and we really need to stop it.
Dave, same question to you, please.
Well, I agree with Tamara, what Tamara said. I mean, it's really, they need to create some kind of threat, some kind of enemy to keep the war machine going, basically. And the war machine is extremely profitable to a number of different companies, aerospace companies and arms manufacturers, etc., etc. And also, I think there's other aspects too. They don't really, it seems that, diplomacy and direct communication are not valued in international affairs anymore. So they don't understand or trust anyone else. And they look to the worst possible things that others might be doing. And then they put them out and the media picks that up. And the media, of course, is owned by the corporations more or less anyway. And the arms companies and aerospace corporations then push these insecurities for their own benefit. So, yeah, it seems that it's a way of keeping the war machine to operate, keep it going.
Let's move to the recent success of the nuclear ban treaty that I know both of you were involved in, helping to promote. Do you think it's possible to ultimately achieve this nuclear ban as long as the United States is aggressively surrounding, again, both Russia and China with conventional forces, but at the same time, also these so-called missile defense systems that are the shield to be used after a U.S. first strike attack, something that the Pentagon annually war games. So, Tamara, you want to go first on that question, please?
Sure. So the United States, with its NATO allies, have installed missile defense systems in Poland, in the Czech Republic, and in Germany. And Russia sees this as very provocative, just like you said, to help facilitate a first strike capability. And as Dave mentioned, NATO does not have a no first use of nuclear weapons. As I mentioned earlier, Canada is not joining the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons because of our membership in NATO. In fact, all NATO members have been doing everything that they can to undermine this important new treaty, which aim is to totally abolish nuclear weapons, which pose an existential risk to all of us. We absolutely must abolish nuclear weapons for human security and survival. But NATO is preventing this, and the missile defense systems in Eastern Europe that NATO and the United States have been expanding can contribute to a nuclear confrontation with Russia. It's very dangerous. We absolutely have to move our troops away from the Russian border. We have to get rid of missile defenses, and all of our countries need to sign on to this new treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. And then I just hope that Dave will talk more about the fact that the United States and the UK are shamefully upgrading and modernizing their nuclear weapons. And this is something that we have to totally denounce, and we have to work really hard to prevent.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree again. Not all the the thing about the missile defense systems as well is that they are not necessarily just for so-called defense. They can be used, they can easily be, warheads can be put on them, and they can be used to fire off a first strike system, first strike attack themselves. So all the while that these missiles are based more or less on the border with Russia, how can Russia be expected to be able to respond positively? And in fact, the placing of and the use of these missile defense systems was really responsible for the falling apart of the INF Treaty, which limited the number of nuclear weapons, small-scale nuclear weapons that could be held in Europe. That treaty is gone now, and it abolished thousands of nuclear weapons from Europe at one time. So things are not going in the right direction. I was hoping that what the treaty might do, it won't enable this at the moment, the big countries to get together and get rid of their nuclear weapons. But what it might do is to be able to give the vast majority of countries in the world who have aligned themselves with the treaty or will do, to apply pressure on these big states, especially the United States, to step back from all the provocative steps that they're taking and move more towards constructive dialogue. Hopefully that's might be one of the effects of the treaty.
And Bruce, let me just add too that along with NATO, with the United States having these missile defenses in Eastern Europe, the United States stores its nuclear weapons in 5 NATO countries: in Italy, Turkey, the Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium. So these nuclear weapons, along with missile defense, is seen as extremely dangerous and destabilizing to Russia. And we have a responsibility in our so-called Western democracies. The United States still having about 6,500 nuclear weapons. The UK and France, other NATO members, having so many nuclear weapons. We have a responsibility to reduce our nuclear arsenals and to disarm.
I live in Bath, Maine, and here we have Bath Iron Works. It builds the Navy Aegis destroyers. that are outfitted with these so-called missile defense systems. And they're being ported right up against Russia's coastline in the Black Sea, the Barents Sea, the Baltic Sea, and nearby in the Mediterranean. At the same time, the U.S. is doing the same thing to China by deploying these same warships with missile defense systems up close to China's borders. So yes, it becomes very difficult for either of those countries to say, yeah, we're willing to get rid of our nuclear weapons. We just have a few minutes left. Dave, if you could say just a short bit about the 2 U.S. space warfare bases in North Yorkshire, where you live, please.
Yeah, just a short distance from me, there are these two bases. One is called Fylingdales. It's a huge radar system, a pyramid radar system, which is part of the US missile defense system. And it's been also used for early warning since it was first installed in around, I don't know, the 50s, 60s. The other place is Menwith Hill, which is a huge US spy base. The NSA, National Security Agency of the US, run this base. And it's basically a surveillance base. It links with satellites, a large number of satellite systems, and it can be used to hack into people's phones, to monitor their presence, to monitor conversations and emails, all sorts of electronic communications. So I think it's the biggest US spy base outside of the United States, and it spies on South America, on Europe, and on Russia and China. So we're working to try to get this more accountable to the UK government. At the moment, it's run by the US.
All right, thank you. The last question is for you, Tamara. It's about Canada and Ukraine. You know, since the US orchestrated coup in Ukraine in 2014, what they called the Maidan, I've really been studying that whole issue, and I've over and over again seen references to Ukrainian right-wing people that moved after the end of World War II. They moved to the US and also to Canada. Could you talk about their influence in Canada around this whole issue of Russia and Ukraine?
Yes, Canada has a very large Ukrainian population, and after the Second World War, Britain encouraged Canada to accept hundreds and hundreds of Nazi sympathizers from Ukraine. So hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers who were part of the Galicia division. This was aligned to the German SS. These were extremely fascist, nationalist forces during the Second World War in the Ukraine. After the war was over, they came to Canada, and they've created a very strong lobby in this country. They are very opposed to Russia. They want the Ukraine to be part of NATO and it to be more aligned with Eastern Europe, or with Europe. And our former Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, her grandfather was a journalist that worked for a Nazi newspaper in the Ukraine and also in Austria. And so they are wanting Canadian troops to be in the Ukraine to train Ukrainian soldiers. They have pushed for a new free trade agreement between Canada and the Ukraine, and they very much want to disassociate the Ukraine from Russia.
All right.
And in Canada, let me just mention too quickly that we've got monuments in Alberta and in Ontario that glorify Ukraine Nazi sympathizers.
Quite chilling. Thank you both very much. We're almost out of time. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching this first edition of Space Alert. We're going to do another one next month and every month with different leaders from the global network on various issues around the world. Until then, good luck to everyone, and please get organized. And thank you, Will Griffin, for putting all this together today. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.